Ever wondered why a psychedelic experience can be this profoundly life-changing event for one person, but kinda just a light show for someone else? Well, it turns out a big part of the answer might actually be hardwired right into our brains. Okay, so let's dive into this really fascinating study that connects the dots between our unique brain biology and the intensity of a psilocybin journey. So here's how we're going to break it down. We're going to treat this like a scientific detective story. First up, we'll look at the central puzzle. Then we'll see how scientists investigated it, by literally scanning people's brains. After that, we'll uncover their key findings, decode what it all means, and finally get into why this research is such a huge deal for the future of therapy. All right, let's kick things off with the big mystery. We all know psilocybin, that's the active compound in magic mushrooms, has some incredible therapeutic potential. But there's this one little problem. Its effects can be, all over the map. And that brings us to the core question here. You can give two people the exact same dose in the exact same environment, and they'll come back with completely different stories. One might have this profound, mystical journey, while the other feels, not that much. The researchers really wanted to know, is there a biological reason for this? And figuring this out is so important because psilocybin is showing some serious promise in clinical trials for treating things like major depression, OCD, end-of-life anxiety, and even addiction. If we can start to predict who's going to respond best, we can make these treatments way safer and a whole lot more effective. Okay, so to get this puzzle, you got to meet the main character in our story, the serotonin 2A receptor, or 5H2R for short. The easiest way to think about it is like a little docking station on your brain cells. Psilocybin comes along, it docks right in, and boom, that's what kicks off the whole psychedelic experience. So the theory was, hey, maybe the number of these docking stations is just different from person to person.
So how in the world do you test a theory like that? Well, you have to count the docking stations. Let's move on to the investigation and see how these scientists actually designed their experiment.
So here's what they did. It's actually a pretty elegant three-step process. First, they used a special kind of brain scan, a PET scan, to get a head count of each person's 5-HT2A receptors. Then, on a totally different day, they gave the participants a dose of psilocybin. And finally, throughout the whole experience, they just asked them to rate what they called the subjective drug intensity, which is basically just, hey, how intense is this right now, on a scale from 0 to 10?
Okay, check this out. This is so cool. This is a map of what the scientists were actually measuring. It's a brain map showing the density of those 5H2A receptors. And you can see the warmer the color, so the reds and yellows, the more of these docking stations are packed into that part of the brain. This let them get a really precise count for every single person in the study.
So with all those intensity ratings they collected, they could actually map out each person's individual journey over time. Now, I know this looks like a bunch of squiggly lines, but don't worry about the details. What's important here is the overall shape. The researchers found this really consistent pattern in all the chaos. Every trip pretty much had 3 phases. You had a quick onset, then a sustained peak plateau where things were at their most intense, and then a gradual return to normal. This model let them measure the exact timing of each phase for everybody. Okay, so now they've got the receptor counts, and they've got the timelines for each trip. This is where it all comes together. This is the aha moment of the whole study. This quote from the paper kind of gives away the punchline. It says that lower binding, which is just a technical way of saying a lower count of available receptors, was linked to more intense experiences and these higher MEQ scores. That stands for Mystical Experience Questionnaire. Now, I know that sounds completely backwards, right? Fewer receptors, bigger experience? Let's look at the data that proves it. It's wild. All right, let's just focus on this top left chart here. This is striking. Down here on the bottom axis, you've got the number of receptors, going from fewer on the left to more on the right. And then on the side, you've got the score on that Mystical Experience Questionnaire. Just look at that clear downward trend. The fewer receptors a person had, the higher their score for a mystical experience was. The link was just undeniable. Okay, now let's look at the bottom left graph. This one is showing how long that peak plateau lasted. And guess what? We see the exact same pattern. The line trends down, which means people with a lower density of receptors actually spent more time in that most intense phase of the trip. And finally, the third piece of the puzzle is in the bottom right chart. This shows the come-down slope. And here, the trend flips and goes up. This means that people with fewer receptors, over on the left, had a steeper, much faster return to baseline. So just to recap, fewer receptors meant a more mystical, longer-lasting peak, followed by a quicker return to normal. It's a remarkably consistent story across the board. So the huge takeaway here is this. your brain's unique wiring. I mean, specifically, the number of these 5-HT2A receptors you have can actually predict the shape and the intensity of a psilocybin experience. It's a direct line from your biology to your subjective experience. Of course, it does raise that fascinating question, why would fewer docking stations lead to a stronger effect? The science is still working on that one.
So now we know that biology can predict the trip's timeline. But what about the experience itself? How do all the different parts, the peak, the come down, that mystical quality, how do they all relate to each other? Let's try to decode the experience.
All right, this thing here is called a correlation matrix, and it's a great way to see how different things are connected. And it's actually super simple to read. The red ovals show a positive link, so when one thing goes up, the other thing goes up too. The blue ovals show a negative link. When one goes up, the other goes down. And what this matrix tells us is pretty cool. First, look at that big red oval. It shows a really strong positive link between how long the peak lasts and the mystical experience score. They just go hand in hand. Then, that blue oval shows that a longer peak is linked to a faster come down, just like we saw in the other graphs. So, what's the takeaway? A long, intense peak seems to be the key ingredient for having one of those profound mystical type experiences. And this table just lays it all out, nice and simple. A lower number of these key receptors in your brain is predictive of a longer peak, a faster come down, and overall, a more mystical and profound experience. It's a strange inverse relationship, but a really powerful one.
Okay, so this is all really fascinating science, right? But what does it actually mean for people? It has some profound implications for how we might actually use these substances in medicine. Let's look at why this research really matters.
Think about it. Before this kind of research, psilocybin therapy was kinda a shot in the dark, a one-size-fits-all approach that led to really unpredictable outcomes. But now, we're starting to see the potential to actually predict how a patient might respond. We could be moving towards guiding treatment based on someone's individual, unique brain biology. This isn't just about confirming the role of one little receptor. This research is opening the door to a completely new way of thinking, a future where psychedelic therapy can be truly personalized, which would make it safer, more predictable, and really unlock its full healing potential. And it all leads to this massive question. We know from other research that these mystical type experiences are often tied to the best therapeutic outcomes. So, could a simple brain scan one day tell us not just what a trip might feel like, but who is most likely to actually be healed by it? This research suggests that future might be a lot closer than any of us think.